Clint Eastwood had seen it all. Hollywood fame, political debates, and decades of public scrutiny. But no one had ever seen him like this. The stage lights burned bright as the legendary actor sat across from journalist Ethan Carter, a man known for his cutthroat interviews and relentless questioning. The audience was packed, the cameras were rolling, and the tension in the room was palpable. Ethan leaned forward, his voice smooth but laced with something sharper. "Clint, you've built your career on being the symbol of toughness. But tell me, does that toughness ever break?" The audience fell silent. For a moment, Clint didn't respond. He exhaled, his usual unshakable presence shifting slightly. His eyes glistened under the harsh lights. The world watched, holding its breath. And then, he spoke. What he said next, no one was prepared for it. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's get started. Clint Eastwood had sat through countless interviews, but this one, something felt different. From the moment he walked onto the set, he sensed the trap. The show's host, Ethan Carter, had a reputation for setting up his guests, especially older Hollywood legends. He wasn't interested in fair discussions. He wanted viral moments, controversy, and takedowns. And tonight, Clint was his target. The studio was packed with a carefully selected audience, young, progressive, and prepped to react on cue. The producers had arranged specific camera angles designed to make Clint appear frail, out of touch, past his prime. But the biggest setup? The questions. Ethan had spent weeks working with his team to craft the perfect ambush. The goal? Make Clint emotional, push him into saying something controversial, use clever edits to make him look weak. Ethan smirked as he looked at his notes. He had the perfect question lined up. And when he asked it, the entire audience would turn against Clint Eastwood, or at least, that's what he thought. Because what happened next, no one saw coming. Clint Eastwood sat back in his chair, his rugged face illuminated by the harsh studio lights. He had been in Hollywood for decades, seen the rise and fall of careers, navigated brutal interviews, but this wasn't an interview. This was an ambush. Ethan Carter smirked, flipping through his cue cards as if he were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Clint," he began, his tone condescending but measured. "You've built your entire career on playing tough, no-nonsense men. But let's be honest, do you think that kind of masculinity still has a place in today's world? I mean, isn't it outdated?" The audience chuckled. A few nodded in agreement. Clint didn't react. He simply studied Ethan. He had heard this kind of setup before. Ethan leaned forward, pressing further. "Think about it. Your movies glorified the kind of men who solve problems with guns, who don't show emotions, who reject progress. Isn't it time we move on from that?" More claps, more cheers. The bait had been thrown. Clint remained silent, but Ethan wasn't done. The ambush intensifies. The host smirked and turned toward the audience, playing to the cameras. "I mean, come on, Clint. Even you have to admit, your entire career was built on a world that doesn't exist anymore. Don't you think young men today need better role models?" The audience laughed. The camera zoomed in on Clint's expression. They wanted a reaction. Ethan pushed further. "Look, I get it. Back in the day, stoicism and toughness were seen as virtues. But let's be real. Do you think your characters actually helped society? Or did they just fuel toxic masculinity?" Louder applause. Clint finally shifted in his seat. He went to speak. Ethan cut him off. I mean, even your fans have to admit, you never played characters who evolved. You played the same role over and over again. A bitter, hardened man who refuses to change. Don't you think that's a little sad? Oof, the crowd gasped. Some laughed nervously. The tension was thick. Clint's hand rested on the arm of his chair. His fingers tapped it lightly. The old Clint would have walked out. The old Clint would have fired back instantly. But this Clint, he was letting Ethan dig his own grave. They shut him down. Again and again, Clint finally raised his hand slightly, signaling that he wanted to respond. Well, I think... Ethan waved him off. Hold on, let me finish. The audience laughed again. Ethan grinned, fully in control. Look, Clint, I respect your work, but let's be honest. Hollywood has moved past you. Your films are great for nostalgia, but do you think they actually matter anymore? Boom. That was the real question. That was the knife in the back. This wasn't just about movies. This was about making Clint feel irrelevant. And the audience? They were loving it. A few clapped, some whispered and nodded. The moment was set. They wanted Clint to break, to lash out, to get angry. But what happened next? No one expected. The smirk that changed everything. Clint Eastwood let the moment sit. He inhaled slowly. Then he smirked. A small, knowing, almost amused smirk. The audience reaction shifted instantly. The confidence on Ethan's face twitched, just for a second. Because suddenly, Clint didn't look like the old washed-up star they were trying to frame him as. He looked like a man who had been in this game a lot longer than anyone else in the room. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, dangerous. Ethan, he said, leaning forward slightly. Are you done? Silence. Ethan blinked. The audience stopped clapping. Because now, it was Clint's turn. Clint Eastwood leaned forward, resting his elbows on the arm of his chair. His smirk hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown. The tension in the room shifted. The audience, once fully on Ethan's side, now sat in silence. Ethan Carter, the smug TV host, had spent the past 10 minutes setting up his trap. He had mocked Clint, interrupted him, used the audience as a weapon, but now he had just lost control. Are you done? Clint repeated, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. Ethan hesitated. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he should respond. The pause lasted just long enough. Then, Clint sat back in his chair and exhaled. See, here's the thing, kid. And with that, he flipped the entire interview on its head. The audience begins to shift. Clint gestured around the room. I've been in Hollywood longer than you've been alive. I've seen guys like you come and go, hosts who think they're smarter than the people they interview, who think that if they cut someone off enough times, they can make them look weak. He chuckled. But you know what I've learned? The loudest guy in the room is usually the weakest. Oof. The audience stirred. A few even clapped. Ethan forced a laugh. Come on, Clint, let's not... No, let's... Clint interrupted, mirroring the way Ethan had been cutting him off the whole interview. The crowd reacted immediately. Oh, he flipped it on him, someone muttered. Clint continued, his voice steady. You keep bringing up my movies, saying they glorify a world that doesn't exist anymore. But let me ask you something, Ethan. When was the last time you actually built something? When was the last time you put in a hard day's work and didn't just sit behind a desk talking about what other people have done? Louder claps. Ethan shifted in his chair. No, hold on, Clint said, smirking. You asked me to let you finish. I think it's only fair you do the same. The audience laughed, and just like that, the power had completely shifted. Ethan tries to recover. It backfires immediately. Ethan straightened his tie. He wasn't used to this. For years, he had dominated interviews, controlled the pace, shut down guests who didn't agree with him. But now, he was the one stumbling. "Look, Clint," he tried again, "I'm not saying you don't have a legendary career. I respect what you've done, but let's be real. Society has changed. The idea of the tough guy, it's just outdated. People today want men who are emotionally open, who—" Clint raised a hand, cutting him off. "Stop right there," he said. "You're proving my point." Ethan blinked. "What?" Clint leaned forward. "You sit here talking about how society has changed. And yet, here you are, on a stage, under bright lights, with a full audience, using every trick in the book to try and break me down. You wanted a reaction. You wanted me to lose my cool. Because no matter how much people like you talk about how toughness is outdated, when it comes down to it, you still see it as a threat." Boom. The audience erupted, some clapped, some gasped, and Ethan, he was starting to sweat. The fatal mistake, Ethan. Overreaches. Ethan felt the room shifting against him. So what did he do? He did what every TV host does when they start losing control. He got personal. "Okay, Clint," he said, forcing a chuckle that sounded more nervous than confident. "If you're so wise, if you have all the answers, then tell me this. Why are you still here? Why not retire? Why not step aside and let the new generation take over?" The audience fell silent. Even Clint's expression darkened just slightly. Ethan thought he had landed a blow, but in reality, he had just sealed his own fate. Clint slowly nodded. "You know, Ethan," he said, "I wasn't going to bring this up, but now I think I will." He turned toward the audience. "Let me tell you all a little story." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, and then Clint Eastwood delivered the knockout punch. The moment that broke the internet. "Years ago, I was directing a movie," Clint began, his voice calm, steady. "And I hired a young actor, talented kid, full of himself, kept talking about how the old ways of filmmaking didn't matter anymore, that Hollywood needed to evolve, that my style was outdated." He chuckled. "One day, we were on set, and I asked him to do a scene a certain way. He looked at me and said, 'Why don't you let the younger generation take over?'" Clint looked Ethan dead in the eye. "You know where that actor is now?" Ethan didn't respond. Neither does anyone else. The audience exploded. Some stood up, clapping. Others gasped. A few simply stared, wide-eyed, realizing what had just happened. Ethan tried to speak, but it was over. He had spent the whole interview trying to make Clint Eastwood look weak. Instead, he had just been destroyed in front of millions of people. The aftermath. Social media erupts. The second the interview ended, the internet exploded. Clint Eastwood destroys liberal host in one sentence. The exact moment Ethan knew he lost. Brutal, absolutely brutal. Within hours, the clip was trending #1 worldwide. Comment sections were brutal. Ethan played himself. Clint Eastwood just made a masterclass in shutting down media hacks. The man didn't even raise his voice. He just ended this dude's career. Even people who normally agreed with Ethan started defending Clint. I don't even like Clint's politics, but this was a bad look for Ethan. That was the most embarrassing cell-phone I've ever seen. By the next morning, Ethan's show was in full damage control. Sponsors were panicking. And Clint, he didn't say another word. He had already won. The interview had barely ended before social media erupted. Within minutes, clips of Clint Eastwood's legendary comeback flooded every platform. Clint Eastwood shuts down liberal host in seconds. The moment Ethan Carter realized he lost. Brutal, absolutely brutal. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, it was everywhere. The video spread like wildfire, racking up millions of views in just hours. And the comments? Clint Eastwood just gave a masterclass on shutting down media snakes. Ethan spent the whole interview setting a trap and fell into it himself. The man didn't even raise his voice. He just ended Ethan's career with a smirk. Ethan Carter had gone into this interview expecting an easy win. Instead, he had just become a meme. Hashtags go viral. This wasn't just an interview. By midnight, multiple hashtags were trending worldwide. Eastwood wins, shut your media exposed, Clint vs. Ethan. Even people who didn't normally agree with Clint's views started admitting, I don't even like Clint Eastwood's politics, but damn, he handled that perfectly. That wasn't an interview, that was an ambush, and Clint flipped the script on him. Notice how Ethan kept interrupting, and the second Clint took control, he panicked. And the worst part for Ethan? His own fans started turning against him. I usually like Ethan's interviews, but this was embarrassing. You can tell he thought Clint was just going to sit there and take it. Big mistake. Dude got destroyed on his own show. But the real damage? It wasn't just online. It was hitting Ethan Carter, where it hurt the most. The sponsors start pulling out. We don't want to be associated with this. Inside network headquarters, panic had set in. The phone lines were flooded with complaints. The network's PR team was in full damage control. Viewership for the show had dropped overnight. Then came the first email. Effective immediately, we are pulling our sponsorship from the Ethan Carter Show. We do not support media bias and unprofessional journalism. Boom. Millions gone instantly. And when one sponsor left, more followed. By noon, 3 more major advertisers had pulled out. By the next morning, half the show's sponsors were gone. Executives were scrambling to do damage control. They issued a desperate statement. We regret that tensions ran high during the interview and remain committed to fair, open discussions. Translation? Please, sponsors, don't leave us. But it was too late. The show was toxic, and the network knew it. Ethan tries to defend himself. It backfires instantly. Ethan Carter had built his career on destroying others. Now, he was the one under fire. He tried to save himself with a statement on Twitter. The way people are attacking me over this interview is proof of how toxic our culture has become. We should be able to challenge ideas without being harassed by online mobs. Big mistake. The replies, brutal. Wait, weren't you the one attacking Clint? You played stupid games, now you're winning stupid prizes. Ethan, just take the L. You got humbled on live TV. Then came the final nail in the coffin. A clip leaked from before the interview. Hot mic footage from the production team. Ethan could be heard laughing with producers, saying, "We just need to push him until he snaps. The audience will eat it up." Boom. This wasn't journalism. It was a hit job. And now, the world knew it. Celebrities and politicians joined the conversation. The scandal was too big to ignore. Hollywood began taking sides. Famous actors, directors, and political figures started weighing in. Clint Eastwood just reminded everyone why he's a legend. Popular commentator, Ethan Carter played himself. End of story. Former talk show host, this is why people don't trust mainstream media anymore. Congressman, even some liberal figures admitted Ethan had gone too far. I don't always agree with Clint, but yeah, this was a bad look for Ethan. Cutting off guests, twisting words, Ethan got a taste of his own medicine and couldn't handle it. And then came the worst blow. A US senator tweeted, "What happened to Clint Eastwood is exactly why people don't trust the media. This was an ambush, not an interview." A sitting senator just called out the media, "Oh, this is BAD." Ethan wasn't just losing credibility in Hollywood, he was losing credibility at the national level. The network tries to save face. But it's too late inside network headquarters. Executives were scrambling, emergency PR teams were deployed. Producers were ordered to find old clips of Clint saying something controversial to shift the narrative. Legal teams were preparing for potential lawsuits. Then came the official network statement. "We acknowledge that tensions ran high during the interview. While we value diverse perspectives, we regret how the conversation unfolded and will be reviewing our interview practices moving forward." Too late. The internet wasn't buying it. Because by now, Ethan Carter's reputation was in ruins. His show was hemorrhaging sponsors. The network was facing real consequences. They had spent years controlling the narrative. Now, the narrative was controlling them. And the worst part, it wasn't over yet. Because now, Clint Eastwood was preparing a lawsuit. The fallout from the disastrous interview had already crippled the Ethan Carter show. Viewers had turned against the host. Sponsors were pulling out by the hour. The network was in full-blown panic mode. But the worst was yet to come. Because now, Clint Eastwood was preparing to take legal action. Clint Eastwood files a lawsuit. This was a coordinated smear. 3 days after the interview, headlines exploded across every major news outlet. Clint Eastwood files multi-million-dollar lawsuit against network for defamation and media manipulation. The lawsuit wasn't just about a bad interview. Clint's legal team made it very clear. The interview was a premeditated ambush. Producers manipulated audience reactions to make Clint look bad. Ethan Carter and his team actively planned to humiliate him. On air, leaked hot mic footage proved the show intended to push him until he snapped. And the biggest accusation? Defamation with intent to harm his career and reputation. Clint wasn't just suing for himself. He was making an example out of them. And the network? They were panicking. Leaked emails and footage. Exposed the truth. As if the lawsuit wasn't bad enough, the internet wasn't done exposing them. A former producer, a whistleblower who had worked behind the scenes on the Ethan Carter show, came forward. And what they revealed? Absolute corruption. They leaked internal emails that proved everything Clint was saying. Producers were instructed to make sure he stumbles. Audience members were pre-selected based on their willingness to react negatively to Clint. Ethan was given pre-written talking points designed to bait Clint into an argument. And then, the worst one, an email from a senior executive to Ethan Carter and his producers before the interview. "Do whatever you need to. We need a viral moment. Make him look bad." Boom. This wasn't journalism. It was a hit job. And now, the world knew it. Public outrage. They lied to everyone. The leaked emails spread like wildfire. Exposed. Network planned to sabotage Clint Eastwood before interview even started. This wasn't journalism. It was a smear campaign. They tried to destroy Clint, but they destroyed themselves instead. The backlash? Unstoppable. Viewers were furious. Hollywood figures started speaking out. More former employees of the network began sharing their own horror stories. comment sections were brutal. So they admit they lied to the audience. And we're supposed to trust them again? If they did this to Clint, how many others have they done it to? This is the moment the media lost all credibility. The network had spent years controlling the narrative. Now, the narrative was controlling them. The network faces massive consequences. Advertisers are leaving. Inside the network's headquarters, chaos had turned into full-blown collapse. Their credibility was in ruins. Major advertisers were cutting ties. Stock prices were plummeting. Then came the final blow. Breaking. Major news network fined for manipulating interviews and spreading false narratives. A $50 million fine. Publicly exposed for deception. Their credibility gone. And the final humiliation, they were forced to issue a public apology to Clint Eastwood. We regret how the interview with Mr. Eastwood was handled. Our network is committed to journalistic integrity and will be implementing new policies to ensure fair treatment of all guests moving forward. Nobody believed them, but they had no choice. They weren't in control anymore. The public was. Ethan Carter disappears. Nobody wants to work with him. Ethan Carter had once been the king of viral interviews. Now, he was radioactive. His show had been shut down. His network had cut ties, and no other station wanted to touch him. Desperate for sympathy, he went on a podcast and tried to play the victim. The way people are attacking me is just proof of how toxic cancel culture has become. It backfired instantly. Wait, weren't you the one canceling people before this? Ethan, you made a career out of humiliating people. You just don't like it when it happens to you. Funny how the people who love cancel culture suddenly hate it when it happens to them. By the end of the month, Ethan deleted his social media, announced he was taking a break from public life, vanished completely. And just like that, his career was over. The network tries to settle the lawsuit. Clint refuses to back down. After weeks of legal battles, the network tried to settle. They knew they couldn't win. The final terms: a multi-million-dollar payout to Clint Eastwood, a full public apology from the network, a commitment to review and revise their interview practices. And the biggest consequence? Clint's lawsuit had set a precedent. From now on, networks couldn't get away with manipulating interviews. They knew if they tried, they could get sued into the ground. Everything had changed. Clint Eastwood's final words. They did it to themselves. A week after the case was settled, reporters finally caught up with Clint. Mr. Eastwood, what do you have to say about everything that happened? Clint smiled, took a sip of his coffee and said, "They did it to themselves." Mic drop. The clip instantly went viral. Clint Eastwood just ended the media in 4 words. This is why legends never die. He didn't just win, he changed the game forever. And just like that, the story was over, but the message would never be forgotten. Because now, the media knew that the American people weren't falling for their tricks anymore. The fallout was complete. The network had lost, Ethan Carter had lost, and Clint Eastwood had won. But this wasn't just a personal victory. This was a reckoning. The show is cancelled. Nobody trusts them anymore. For years, the Ethan Carter Show had been a dominant force in media. Now, it was radioactive. Ratings had collapsed overnight. Sponsors had completely abandoned them. Viewership had plummeted by over 60% in just a week. Every new episode was met with relentless backlash. At first, the network tried to rebrand. They shifted Ethan to a different format. They brought in new guests. They hoped people would forget. They didn't. Then came the final announcement. Breaking. The Ethan Carter Show, officially cancelled after historic backlash. The once powerful talk show was gone for good. Ethan Carter, who had spent years destroying reputations, had now been cancelled by his own audience. And the worst part? Clint never had to say a word. Ethan Carter's career is over. No one will hire him. With his show cancelled, Ethan tried everything to salvage his career. He pitched new projects to other networks. Nobody wanted him. He reached out to streaming platforms. They ignored him. His reputation was destroyed. His one final act of desperation. He went on a podcast to tell his side of the story. The way people have attacked me over this is just proof of how toxic cancel culture has become. Big mistake. The replies, brutal. Wait, weren't you the one attacking Clint? You played stupid games. Now you're winning stupid prizes. Ethan, just take the L. You got humbled on live TV. Then came the final nail in the coffin. A clip leaked from before the interview, hot mic footage from the production team. Ethan could be heard laughing with producers, saying, "We just need to push him until he snaps. The audience will eat it up." Boom. This wasn't journalism, it was a hit job. And now, the world knew it. The network faces the ultimate humiliation. They lost everything. It wasn't just Ethan. The entire network was paying the price. They had lost millions in ad revenue. They were still drowning in lawsuits. Their ratings had plummeted across all of their shows. Then came the final humiliation. The network was forced to issue a formal apology. "We regret the handling of the Clint Eastwood interview. We are committed to rebuilding trust with our viewers and ensuring fair journalistic practices in the future." Nobody believed them, because by now, they had lost credibility. They had lost their audience, and they had lost the trust of the American people. For years, they had controlled the narrative. Now, the narrative was controlling them. And the worst part? It wasn't over yet. Because now, Clint Eastwood was more powerful than ever. Clint Eastwood, more powerful than ever. And Clint, he didn't just survive the attack, he thrived. His speaking engagements skyrocketed, his social media following exploded. And most importantly, he became a symbol for taking on corrupt media, a symbol for standing your ground, a symbol for winning against impossible odds. At an event, weeks later, a reporter tried to ask Clint about the scandal. "Mr. Eastwood, what do you think about Ethan Carter and everything that happened?" Clint smiled, took a sip of his coffee and said, "They did it to themselves." Mic drop. The clip instantly went viral. Clint Eastwood just ended the media in 4 words. This is why legends never die. She didn't just win, she changed the game forever. And just like that, the story was over. But the message would never be forgotten. Final message. The truth always wins. They tried to destroy him. They wanted to humiliate him. But instead, they exposed themselves, they lost their credibility, they lost their audience, and they lost the trust of the people. Because in the end, the truth always wins. If you care about the truth, free speech, and holding the media accountable, share this video, because the media wanted you to forget what happened. Don't let them. The end.